Every year, salmon begin one of the most remarkable journeys in nature. They leave the open ocean and travel hundreds of miles through rivers and streams. They battle strong currents, hungry predators, changing weather, and countless obstacles. Against the odds, they return to the very places where they were born. For thousands of years, this journey helped shape entire ecosystems. It fed bears, eagles, forests, and people. It became part of cultures, traditions, and livelihoods. But then humans stepped in, not because we wanted to destroy salmon, because we wanted more of them. We wanted more fish for food, more fish for jobs, more fish for recreation, and more fish for growing communities. So governments built hatcheries. Scientists developed breeding programs. Millions and millions of young salmon were released into rivers. The idea seemed simple. If nature was not producing enough salmon, humans would help. But decades later, a difficult question emerged. What if helping salmon was also changing them? What if the fish being created to save salmon populations were creating entirely new problems? And what happens when science gives us the power to redesign nature itself? In this video, we follow the fascinating story of salmon hatcheries in Canada. It is a story about science, politics, economics, conservation, and the future of food production. Most importantly, it is a story about competing visions. One group wanted abundant salmon. Another wanted better fishing opportunities. Others wanted truly wild salmon. And now a new vision is emerging. Salmon designed to survive climate change. Can all these goals exist together, or are they pulling salmon management in different directions? Let's find out. To understand today's salmon debate, we need to travel back several decades. At the time, salmon were not simply fish. They were economic engines. Communities, commercial fishing industries, and families depended on them. Governments saw salmon as a valuable natural resource that could support economic growth. The challenge was obvious. Natural salmon populations rise and fall. Some years produced strong returns. Other years produced disappointing numbers. To many policymakers, there seemed to be an obvious solution. Why rely entirely on nature when science could help? This thinking gave rise to large-scale salmon enhancement programs. Hatcheries became the center of this vision. Adult salmon were collected. Their eggs and sperm were carefully managed. Young fish were raised in controlled environments. Then they were released into rivers and streams. The expectation was clear. More hatcheries would mean more salmon. More salmon would mean larger fisheries. Larger fisheries would support economic growth. For many years, this vision dominated decision-making. Success was often measured in numbers. How many fish were produced? How many fish were released? How many fish returned? The goal was abundance. At first, this vision appeared attractive. After all, who would argue against having more salmon? But nature would soon challenge this assumption. As hatchery production expanded, scientists started noticing something unexpected. In the next session, we will see how nature forced people to rethink what success actually meant. Something strange began to happen. Despite enormous investments in hatcheries, salmon populations continued facing serious difficulties. Some rivers experienced declines. Certain populations struggled. Questions started emerging. If millions of salmon were being released, why were problems continuing? Researchers began looking more closely. What they discovered changed the conversation. The issue was not simply about the number of fish. It was about the kind of fish being produced. For years, Hatcheries focused on producing large numbers of salmon. But scientists started investigating whether hatchery fish behaved differently from wild fish. Could growing up in artificial environments affect survival? Could breeding practices influence future generations? Could hatchery fish unintentionally weaken wild populations? These questions became increasingly important. The discussion was no longer about quantity alone. It was becoming a debate about quality. And this shift would eventually lead to one of the biggest changes in salmon management: the rise of the wild salmon movement. Wild salmon are more than fish living outside hatcheries. For many scientists, they represent something deeper. They are the result of countless generations adapting to local conditions. Every river is different. Every watershed presents unique challenges. Over time, salmon populations develop traits that help them survive in specific environments. When hatchery fish mix with wild populations, some researchers worry these adaptations may be weakened. Studies began raising concerns about genetic impacts. The debate intensified. Supporters of hatcheries pointed to economic benefits. Critics argued that hatcheries might be undermining the very populations they were supposed to protect. Government agencies found themselves caught between competing goals. They wanted productive fisheries, but they also wanted healthy wild salmon. Balancing those objectives became increasingly difficult. Soon, policies began shifting. Conservation became more important. Protecting wild salmon gained greater attention. Yet hatcheries did not disappear. Instead, a new challenge emerged. How could hatcheries continue operating while reducing risks to wild fish? The answer would come from an unexpected place: genetics. In the next session, we'll explore how DNA technology transformed the salmon debate and gave scientists an entirely new way of looking at fish populations. Quick interruption. If you're finding this deep dive valuable, verify that subscribe button is clicked. We're tracking the political economy of food and agriculture, so you don't miss the next video. For decades, people could observe salmon from the outside. They could measure size. They could track migration. They could count populations. But genetics allowed researchers to look inside the fish itself. Suddenly, scientists could study inherited traits in unprecedented detail. This changed everything. Researchers could identify relationships between salmon. They could trace family histories. They could better understand how hatchery fish interacted with wild populations. New technologies made it possible to determine whether a fish came from hatchery parents. Scientists gained powerful tools to monitor breeding programs. As genetic knowledge expanded, so did concerns. The more researchers learned, the more complicated the story became. Some findings suggested that hatchery practices could create long-term consequences. Others pointed toward opportunities for improving hatchery management. Genetics was no longer just a research tool. It was becoming a central part of salmon policy. And soon, it would open the door to an even bigger question. Could humans deliberately breed salmon for the future? Climate change is transforming rivers, oceans, and ecosystems. Water temperatures are rising. Extreme weather events are becoming more common. Many salmon populations face increasing pressure. Faced with these challenges, some researchers began asking a controversial question. What if breeding programs could help salmon adapt? What if genetic markers associated with heat tolerance could be identified? What if hatcheries could produce fish better suited for future conditions? To some people, this idea sounds practical, If salmon are struggling, helping them adapt could increase survival. But others see a serious risk. The more humans actively select traits, the further salmon move from natural processes. The debate becomes philosophical as much as scientific. Should humans guide evolution? Or should nature remain in control? There are no easy answers, and that is exactly why the conversation remains so heated. One of the most fascinating discoveries from this story is that people are often talking about different versions of salmon. Not physically different fish, but different ideas and visions. The first vision is abundant salmon. The goal is producing as many fish as possible. The second vision is sporting salmon. Fish that support recreational fishing and provide exciting experiences for anglers. The third vision is wild salmon. Fish shaped primarily by natural processes. The fourth vision is resilient salmon. That is, fish capable of surviving future environmental challenges. Each vision sounds reasonable and has its supporters, but they do not always point in the same direction. And this is where conflict emerges. Policies often attempt to satisfy all four goals simultaneously. Yet pursuing one objective can sometimes undermine another. The result is a complicated balancing act that continues today. This debate is not only about science, it is also about economics. Communities depend on fisheries. Jobs depend on fisheries. Businesses depend on fisheries. Political leaders face pressure to support economic activity while also protecting ecosystems. That creates difficult trade-offs. Should resources focus on increasing production? Should they focus on conservation? Should they focus on climate adaptation? Every decision benefits some groups while disappointing others. This is why salmon management remains controversial. The fish itself sits at the center of competing economic, environmental, and cultural interests. As we approach the end of this story, it is important to examine the possible downsides. Large-scale hatchery programs may create dependence on artificial production. They may divert attention from habitat protection. They may increase conflicts between conservation and harvest goals. Genetic changes may produce outcomes that are difficult to reverse. Selective breeding may create new uncertainties. And climate-focused breeding programs could deepen disagreements over how much human intervention is appropriate. In other words, every solution can create new challenges. That does not mean hatcheries are failures, but it does mean that technological solutions rarely solve complex environmental problems by themselves. The story of salmon is really a story about us. It reveals how societies try to solve environmental problems. It shows how science can create new possibilities. And it reminds us that every decision about nature reflects values, priorities, and visions of the future. For decades, hatcheries promised abundance. Later, conservation demanded wildness. Today, climate change is creating pressure for resilience. None of these goals have completely replaced the others. Instead, they continue to exist side by side. And that means the future of salmon remains uncertain. The question is no longer whether humans can shape nature. The question is how much shaping is too much, and who gets to decide. Here are 6 key lessons from this story. 1. More production does not always solve environmental problems. 2. Technological solutions can create unintended consequences. 3. Conservation and economic growth often pull policy in different directions. 4. Genetics is becoming increasingly important in agriculture and food systems. 5. Climate change is forcing societies to rethink how they manage natural resources. 6. The future of food production depends as much on values and politics as it does on science. If you enjoyed this video, leave a comment and share your thoughts. What do you think? Should humans actively breed animals to help them survive climate change? Or should nature be allowed to adapt on its own? Also, check out the other videos on this channel for more deep dives into the political economy of food and agriculture. And keep an eye out for our next video, where we'll continue exploring how power, technology, economics, and food systems shape the world around us. Thanks for watching.